Hi there. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Crystal Wittevrongo, collaborating with Common Sense Calgary, here today to speak with Tony Dinh, who is running for Ward 9 City Council in Calgary's upcoming 2025 elections. Tony, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, I'm happy to be here, Crystal.
Awesome. Well, I would love to hear more about you. Can you tell me a bit about your background and what leads you into City Hall?
So, I am a born and raised Vietnamese Calgarian. My parents came to Canada to start a fresh new life from scratch, and they left Vietnam on a boat and arrived in Canada as refugees. And I feel indebted to this country and this city, and I want to give back, and that's why I'm running for city councilor for representing Ward 9 as city councilor. So, a little bit about my background: I grew up in the Catholic system and went to SAIT and University of Calgary. I studied civil engineering and real estate development, and I'm currently serving as a president at Albert Park Raslin Heights Community Association. And so I've been in business, self-employed for 18 years in real estate, building and development. And I'm looking to give that experience away. I think that my experience with, home building and being self-employed and being on a president of a board with, governments, I think it complements the counselor role, and I really believe that I would serve the people in a very common sense and practical way, where what people want here these days.
hmm And so, for your ward, Ward 9, what are some of the top concerns? What are people telling you when you're speaking to them in the community or at their doors?
So definitely the runaway spending and crime and growing disconnect between City Hall and everyday Calgarians. So people feel that the city is no longer affordable, and there's crime and increase of crime and social disorder, and then also City Hall doesn't listen to them. They feel like they're neglected and that there's not real representation here. And so those are the biggest things that they want: fair taxes. They want they want their basic services. So roads, the roads, bridges, potholes, police, fire, all those things taken care of. And if we can get the basics right, I think they would be more willing to explore where else we can spend money and invest towards the future. Things that will pay off in the future.
hmm Yeah, definitely. Those are some core common themes that I'm hearing in these interviews is, affordability, spending, those sorts of priorities for the city. And so there is the question of who's best positioned to tackle some of these things. And so, in your perspective, what is the core function of a city council or city hall?
So city council is the one that governs. They represent the people, and being involved with the people, listening to them, engaging them, and understanding what they really want, and then represent them. And then you bring that to administration, and administration will do the operations, the day-to-day operations, and fulfill on what the council's choices are, and what they're voting on, so that they're delivering what the people want, and that's where it should work with city council and
Mhm.
administration. Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And I've heard from a lot of Calgarians myself in recent years about City Hall undertaking priorities that are maybe best left to other orders of government, whether that's the climate emergency or certain health related policies, things of that nature. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what should City Hall be doing?
City hall should stick to the basics. They shouldn't, I don't believe they should be in the climate business. As you mentioned, I believe that's more of a provincial or federal jurisdiction. And so city council should get out of the climate business, and stick back to the basics. They subscribe to 100 and sorry, what was it, $87 billion for a climate emergency act, and we want to get back to the basics and deliver that really well and efficiently.
And it's funny you say efficiently, because a lot of people would say that the city does not run efficiently, whether that's in how they continually increase property taxes to cover some of these core services, or just the lack of services or quality of services altogether. What is your view on Calgary's current property taxes? In order to cover some of these services, do you think we need to increase some of the property taxes or stay the same? Kind of broadly, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I would propose to freeze the taxes. When I talk to people at the doors, they just feel like the taxes just keep increasing, and when you think they've had enough, they come back with a 5.4% increase, and so people just feel that they're paying too much and getting too little
Mm-hmm.
of their services. So I would think that we should freeze the taxes, and like again, just delivering on the core services really well, and start to build trust back with the people, because with all these developments that are going on, the city has got a lot more revenue, and so all this development as our city's growing, but it's not the revenue problem, it's a spending problem.
Mm-hmm.
If your salary is 60,000, and you have a car, and then you get it to 100,000, and you spend a more expensive car, you're kind of at the same place. You're not really getting ahead, more or less. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's we're spending a lot, even though we have increased our revenue a lot.
So alongside a freeze of property tax, or kind of staying the same in property taxes, it sounds like you're suggesting that we need to look at cutting spending as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think they've grown the government by quite a bit. I think it's about 20%, and
Mm-hmm.
and so that's a lot of on everyday Calgarians. And so yeah, I think we need to manage our spending, and really have some transparency and accountability to the taxpayers. Why are we increasing every year, and they're not seeing the benefits, so they're
Mm-hmm.
they're eroding the trust here. And we had a very good rating. I think we're at A minus, and now we're at D plus.
Mm-hmm.
That's a pretty steep jump, if your child or whatever was in the school and they had an A minus and they dropped to D plus. I think you really need to look at that and see where are things going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We really got to look into that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And so we're also looking at a budget this year where we're expecting a surplus. Uh, if you were in city council, what would you do if there's a surplus? Would you recommend returning it to taxpayers? Would you recommend it being put into reserves, or perhaps another option?
So that just shows that the city collected too much money from the beginning,
Hmm.
and so what I would propose would be to, the following year, give it back to the people. You've collected too much from them, whether give them a credit or some sort of a balance to their next year's taxes, and make it right, but in a way that doesn't cost more money. If they've got to go through a lot of paperwork, and like here's $20 back to the citizens, and that operation, if that costs a lot of money just to do that, maybe put it to a fund, put it to something that they can use in the future. But we use some common sense, not let's not spend it all on the administration, and basically erode any of these savings.
Yeah, agreed. I often find it interesting that people don't think about the cost of administrating some of the programs that would deliver, value or money, but then the cost of actually running it is so high. So there is definitely a balance that's needing to be struck when we make suggestions in the policy sphere. And speaking of balance, I'd like to kind of talk a little bit about affordable housing. So there are some people who think that the city should be highly subsidizing housing for low income Calgarians. And then there's others who think that the city should really be stepping out of the way of some development and letting the market sort of take its approach, and reduce delays, cut some of the bureaucracy and those sorts of things that end up costing Calgarians more. What are your thoughts about that when it comes to affordable housing? What role should the city really be playing?
So I believe affordable housing, they describe it as 30% of your income. If you're spending more than 30% of your income, then you need affordable housing. And so we do have a shortage of affordable housing. I understand, Calgary housing, there's wait list, and I think we're about 3.5% compared to major cities, which are about, Toronto, Vancouver, about 6 to 8%. So I think that would help with some of the homeless people and population. But the city needs to create a environment where the profit and non-for-profit builders, developers can get housing efficiently, quickly, and without too much cost. And so if the city could, allow quicker permitting and an environment where people can thrive, then they can get the housing to market, or at least, having people with, roofs over their heads in beds. So city council needs to, create efficiencies. And I think that's where my experience would be really well worth, we're valuable with 18 years experience. We need to solve this housing issue. And I think what better person that's done it in the private sector to bring that experience into council so that we can actually get some practical experience.
Yeah. And so in your view, then, what's the right balance between supporting lower income individuals, and ensuring that everybody has housing options?
Sorry, the balance?
Between supporting lower income and individuals and ensuring that everybody has options.
Yeah. So we do need options of housing. Not everyone needs the decked out 1,800 square feet semi-detached to the nines. Just really high end. People want affordable housing. They want something that meets their price point, right? And so there's got to be a balance of in construction in Calgary, people need to bring affordability, but the city also needs to be a partner in affordability. And so part of those things that the city requires the builders, or the profit or non-for-profit developers, they add a lot of different engineering or different specs. So for example, some of the smaller projects, they require DSSPs. And so if they could, on the smaller ones, maybe they can not have to do that for all the projects, and maybe sidewalks. So they're putting in conditions for builders and developers to put in new sidewalks, which is okay. So if you want a brand new sidewalk, who pays for it at the end of the day? It's the end user, the person in the end that lives in the house. It ends up being their cost, because the builders and it comes down to their bottom line, and then eventually it reflects to the end user. So the city needs to be a partner in creating affordability. And so if they can allow certain things that doesn't add extra cost, then the end user can actually get that affordable housing. So the partner needs to partner with the builders, whether for profit or not for profit.
Yeah, that makes sense. If there's, processes are slowed down, costs accumulate, as we all know all too well. And so one of the things that was kind of positioned in terms of affordability was the blanket rezoning. And the city is saying that, a year in, there's been 1,500 new units created as a result of the blanket rezoning, and so that it's somewhat a success in that regard. What are your thoughts on the blanket rezoning as a policy, and then also in terms of affordability, how that either helps or hinders affordability?
So the blanket rezoning, like, I'm a builder by trade, and I get what's available. I understand the certainty that you have with the blanket rezoning. And when you undertake a project, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a lot to take on. You got the banks and everything like that. But my issue is that 70% of people are against the blanket rezoning, and
Mm-hmm.
because of that fact, I'm against the blanket rezoning. I would vote with the people, and so where did the market go? They built these, the fourplexes, the row
Mm-hmm.
houses, suited, but they weren't affordable. They built them 2 stories high, 3 stories high, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms with on master ensuite. So they really made them elaborate and very,
Mm-hmm.
like I'll say, these sexy buildings, and so they didn't focus on affordability, and that's what the
Mm-hmm.
market wanted. These projects, they towered over people, so they go to their privacy, their sunlight, their parking, and the density and the strain on infrastructure. So there's many things where the neighbors didn't appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
but at the end of the day, it did not provide affordable housing, and part of that was because the builders just didn't do it. They wanted to build some big expensive projects that were not affordable at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. And so, when blanket rezoning was approved by the city as a policy, it was after many, many public hearings. And it seemed pretty clear that Calgarians weren't in support of this policy. And then on the other side, we were hearing things about it being, maybe a vocal minority as opposed to the broader Calgary. So when we have these far-reaching policies that are really impacting literally every Calgarian, do you think that they should be left to council to decide, or should something like this be up for voters to directly decide, like in a plebiscite?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, a plebiscite would have been good. Let the people's voice be heard.
Hmm.
Especially how polarizing it was. It was, 70% of the people were against it, and city council still pushed it through.
Hmm.
And that just shows the lack of accountability and to the people. They heard them, and what did they do? They still pushed it through, and so no wonder why there's trust has been eroded with the city council and the people. And so I think we really need to work towards building that trust again with the people, and start delivering what they want.
Hmm. Hmm. And pushing projects through kind of leads me to my next topic. When we look at what the city has signed on to for the foreseeable future with the four big projects of the new event center, the BMO center expansion, Arts Commons transformation, and the Foothills Field House. The city's own chief financial officer had said that the city can't take on more than one of these projects without significant financial risk. Yet we saw council approve all four. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you kind of sit in that debate?
Well, it's silly because if we can't afford it all, I don't know why they're still discussing it and then approve all of them. So it's really it's a silly approach, and so at the end of the day, it comes onto the taxpayers. We're the ones that are going to pay for it when we couldn't really exactly afford it. So there needs to be some more accountability, and less of these kind of legacy projects. We need better, I guess, law and order.
Hmm. And so, if you were on city council and it became clear that that was the case and you needed to support one project and only one, which of those four would you support and why?
Um, I think I would talk to the constituents and see which one. Every ward is different. Everyone,
Hmm.
all of them are very different, and they have different requirements and wants and needs. So I would go back to the people and see which is most important to them.
Hmm. Hmm. That's a good answer. It's not an answer I've heard often, which is surprising, but it's a good answer. And so, when it comes to the Green Line LRT, which we see as being quite a hot topic, very lengthy, costing more, serving less people, and being shorter in length than originally proposed, how do you feel about the Green Line LRT as it currently stands? Do you support it?
So I think if we look back at the intentions of the Green Line, it was supposed to connect the southeast all the way to the north,
Mm-hmm.
and what we got is something that's way more expensive. A fraction of the distance of what was supposed to get delivered, and a lot of back and forth. And so I think if we revisit the intention of it, the way that it's set up right now, I think there's some big concerns. I wouldn't be opposed to do a BRT, from the southeast all the way to the north.
Mm-hmm.
Build something that you can get rapid bus transportation. Getting it to all the people, the citizens, the stakeholders, and actually service the whole city. Deliver on what you actually wanted to do,
Mm-hmm.
and and then eventually build it in some sort of infrastructure that could turn into an LRT down the road. But at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, just deliver on what the intention was, connect the southeast to the north, connect our city, and then still moving people at 80% of the people at 20% of the cost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so what do you think we should learn from the Green Line LRT saga? In everything from how it originally was proposed to how it was rolled out, like what lessons should the city take from that?
Um, I think they just got to be smarter and a little more practical. There was a lot of back and forth, so um, they we need to take a practical approach on it. There was just a lot of reports and a lot of fighting with different levels of government. They needed to make a decision and move forward with it. I think initially it was from the federal government had an idea. I think it was the Trudeau government, and that kind of messed things up there. But yeah, we just need to make a decision and start moving forward with it.
Hmm. And how do you think the city should work with the province on mega projects like this? Like how should the risks and costs be shared in an ideal scenario?
Well, I think they should be involved, the provincial and federally. Like they should put some money towards our city,
Hmm.
and and they should be collaborative. So yeah, we would be worthwhile to put all levels of government and invest into long-term investments will improve our city for decades and decades on.
Hmm. So speaking of long-term investments, that leads me to critical infrastructure. We saw last year a catastrophic water main break that impacted the city for far too long. People were left without water. They needed to boil water for use in some cases, and just a lot of Calgarians felt that the whole scenario was mismanaged from communications right through to what happened in the very end. What are your thoughts on how the city managed that crisis?
Mm. Well, it was mismanaged. People have known about it for years. I've talked
Hmm.
to people in the industry, and they've known about it for years, and still it got neglected, and until finally it blew up on everyone in Calgary. And we didn't have our water, and the city should take proactive approaches to deal with these major infrastructure for our city before it blows up in front of on everyone's face here, and so I think I was reading a report the other day that Edmonton has actually they so Calgary's water, I think it's our water pipes are leaking about 20%, and
Hmm.
Edmonton's at about 5%, and so they've taken a proactive approach. So Calgary, we got to do better. We got to do
Hmm.
better.
So, what would you suggest in changing in how Calgary manages its critical infrastructure?
I think third party. They had a third party to assess it, and having some continual reports. How is our systems looking? What needs to be done? What's the shelf life on it? Let's make sure we are proactive versus being reactive.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, that's definitely something that I think Calgarians can get behind is the idea of being proactive rather than reactive, which leads me to transit safety. We see a lot of people really hesitant to use transit for safety concerns, whether it be in the downtown core or even along some of the BRT routes up in the north. Um, What do you think about how the city is prioritizing transit safety or its transit strategy?
Mhm. You know, like I went to Europe. I went to London a couple of years back, and I took the subway and take a look at the infrastructure, and they have those gates that people enter, and I
Hmm.
thought it was a really efficient process, and I wouldn't be opposed if we revisited that. I believe that was brought up in the past, and they talked about cost
Hmm.
to do that, but I think that it shouldn't be overlooked. Like public safety shouldn't be overlooked because of a cost like that.
Hmm.
Uh, because if people don't feel safe, they're not going to use it. So what's the point of having this public transit if people don't feel safe, and then they don't want to use it? So we got to make sure it's safe. We got to make sure that people will actually want to use it, and then invest into it. So, but public
Hmm.
safety is number one when it comes to public transportation, and even for the operators, that people we're getting more and more violence on them, and they're just doing their job.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's been some statistics that show crime is actually decreasing a bit, but incidents of violent crime are very much still present. How do you think about the perception of safety versus the statistics of safety? Like, it's making me think of the fare gates that you just introduced. I think that that's a very bold kind of visual thing that people can get behind. But is there anything else that you think about in that regard when it comes to the perception of safety?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it reminds me, when I've talked to people at the doors in Ward 9, the statistics aren't necessarily telling the whole story.
Mm,
It's actually there's been some resignation. People don't even report some crimes anymore,
mm,
because they've come to realize that it happens, and so they don't even take the time to report. So some statistics may say that it's lowered or whatever it is, but I
hmm.
know there's resignation in reporting.
Hmm. Yes, yeah, I've heard that from other people as well, that there's just a lack of reporting now, which is definitely concerning because if we don't know about the problems, how are we situating ourselves to best address the problems? Which leads me to the supervised consumption site in downtown Calgary. People that are really vocally opposed to it point to things like crime and impacts on business and other public spaces nearby. Whereas people that are supportive, point to the need for such a facility. What are your thoughts on the supervised consumption site? And should it be relocated? Should it be closed? I know there's, a debate between the city and the province on who's best positioned to manage this.
Hmm. So yeah, like it comes down to public safety, and so you got the residents, you got businesses, and when you have homeless and transient population, drug overdoses, open use of drugs, people sleeping on the streets or back alleys and things like that. It's not good for the residents or businesses or thriving you know downtown. So I think that I think it maybe would be more appropriate to relocate it somewhere that is more appropriate for medically,
Hmm.
not necessarily in a residential and business district.
Hmm. And what criteria would you think would be appropriate to use in determining where to best relocate to? You mentioned like close to medical facilities, but is there other criteria as well?
Well, I think a place where they can get all the services they need. So
Hmm.
I do believe that they need more resources, such as social workers and things like that. So if there's a place where they can get all the services they need for curing addiction, we
Hmm.
want to cure the addictions, um, and then get them back into being more productive. So an area where all the services can be dealt with.
Hmm. Hmm. And how do you see the relationship between the city and the province working in regards to the supervised consumption site? Like, do you see the province as taking the lead and then the city being a support, or what's the ideal rollout of something like that?
I think that's a provincial. I think that's a provincial healthcare and
Mm-hmm.
things like that. So I think the province should take the lead on it, and the municipality will should do their part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And finally, I wanted to ask you about political alignment because this is the very first time we're having an election in Calgary where there is the presence of political parties at the municipal level. Would you care to share your affiliations at that in that regard?
Yeah, so I am running as a conservative valued candidate. You
Hmm.
know, I am have an endorsement with the Better Calgary Party, and they are a conservative party. They're the only one that ran a nomination process, and
Okay.
so I looked at their principles and I really connected with them, and so I looked into it, and so I there's no affiliation provincially or federally. It's illegal. You can't have any affiliation. So this just helps people, I believe, the voters understand who they're voting for and what they're voting for. It gives an extra layer of vetting because a lot of people campaign on being a conservative, and then when they get elected, they're not actually share
Hmm.
conservative values. So I think the political parties helps give people some clarity. I mean, we were very strongly vetted, and so eventually, once we got the endorsement, I think it helps the voters uh, be able to determine who is the person that they say they are. Yeah, you bet.
And what would you say to the voters who maybe don't share conservative values in your ward? How could you reassure them that you are the candidate for them who may be not following the same political lens?
Yeah, so I'm fiscally conservative, and I would say we're all conservative at home. At the grocery store, when you buy items, like, do you spend the most amount of money on the item? No, you don't. You want to get the best value, and that's what I really want to do too. Is I want to get the best value for you and your families and your communities. I'm a fiscal conservative, and we really just we in a way we got to tighten up our belt here, and
Hmm.
so that's what I would deliver. That's the person I am.
Hmm. Awesome. And so we've reached the end of our planned interview, but I wanted to give you the opportunity if there's one thing you want to say to viewers who may be in your ward or may not be in your ward, just kind of one thing to leave with viewers today.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. So again, my name's Tony Dinh. I'm running for Ward 9 City Councilor, and I really want to get back to the basics. I am the conservative candidate, and we want to get the basics right. We want affordable, we want a safe city, and we want to get fair taxes. So if that's what you want, I'm definitely your candidate to deliver on that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Tony, for taking the time to chat with me today. And to the viewers, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching. And please remember to stay engaged, stay informed, and get out and vote. This is a very important election for the city of Calgary. Every election's important, but this one's is very important. And you need your voice to be heard. So please get out and vote. So thank you, Tony. And I will close us out here.
All right, thanks so much.